Stuff. Okay, so Joe, just quickly, how long have I got? About 20 minutes, right?
Got about 20 minutes. Yes, please.
Cool, let's go. There's a big topic in 20 minutes. So welcome to sort of my talk here in regards to resilience in the workplace. And what I want to do in the next 20 minutes is kind of look at practical advice in regards to what you can take away from this 20-minute session in regards to what you can apply in your organizations to help employees build resilience. And again, I think it's burnout in particular is a topic that is definitely being discussed a lot. I'm really interested to sort of hear from Subira as well in regards to her perspectives. But I think when we're looking at resilience in the workplace, as I'm going to sort of walk through, I don't think it's a straightforward solution, but I'm going to try and give you as many tips as I can to make it practical and give you all something to take away as well. But in regards to kind of a little bit about the session and what I'm going to be sort of covering, we're going to look at kind of what resilience is. I think there's a lot of misconceptions around resilience. I'm going to share a couple of personal examples there as well. We're going to kind of look at the importance of resilience within an organization, within a business, and how it links to mental health and well-being, the benefits of a resilience workforce, and again, just giving you those practical tips that you can take away from this quick session and implement and hopefully try and see some of those positive changes as well. So as we've already kind of highlighted, I'm Paul. I'm the founder of Every Mind at Work. Every Mind at Work is an organization where we work with different organizations, delivering different approaches when it comes to mental health in the workplace. I'm very fortunate that we've worked with over 100 organizations on a year-by-year basis. And what started with just kind of me sharing my story has evolved into, we're still a relatively small team, but there's now 15 of us. And we work with the likes of, financial companies. Julius Baer, I know Monique's a big part of your group. We've got Marsh McLennan, Guy Carpenter, Wagamama, Co-op, many other different organizations as well. And the work that I do comes from personal experience. And just for the beginning part of today's session, just to give you a bit of a context around why I do the work that I do, I want to kind of share a little bit about that personal experience with you guys, because it does definitely loop into resilience and the topic that I'm going to be sort of sharing as well. But the photos that you see, they're only there to make me look good, to be honest with you, because I'm wearing a hoodie today and didn't dress up for the occasion. But I've been sharing my story of mental health for the last 6 years, and that's led to many different opportunities, as you can see on the screen here. But obviously founding Every Mind was one of those key opportunities. Guys, if you don't mind, can you just pop yourself on mute, because I can just hear myself and it's really off-putting when you hear yourself a little bit as well. But in regards to me sharing my story, it started when I was, I can still hear myself. Hold on. That's better. So I started sharing my story back when I was about 6 years ago, and sharing my story come from the fact that, as you might have seen in that bio there, I was impacted by mental illness when I was 18. And if you guys don't mind me sharing, just for this beginning part, I never believed I'd be impacted by mental illness. My understanding of mental illness, my education around it was massively different to kind of what it is now because of my own personal experience. And sadly, I was impacted by mental illness through the loss of my dad. And I sadly lost my dad to suicide. And suicide is a very unique grief that, you have to experience. And it was very difficult for me just because I never, ever expected or imagined my dad to die in that way. He was an engineer. He was a qualified physiotherapist. My dad read some of my favorite self-help books. My dad ran every single day. He meditated. He had a psychology A-level. So that person on paper, I never imagined would ever be dealing with a mental illness. But again, I think the shame that my dad experienced, the challenges that he was going through, the fact that back then he definitely felt like he couldn't talk about it, led him to that difficult situation. And at that time, I was 18 when it happened, and I didn't really deal with it very well. And again, we'll talk about this in the sense of resilience here today. But my idea of being resilient was bottle it up and bury it and don't talk about it and be tough, right? Just kind of get on with it. But that kind of led me into my own challenges a few years later of depression, anxiety, and really needing that support. And I was very fortunate to get that help when I was 21. It's about 11 years ago now. And I started talking to a therapist about it. And that was the game changer for me. It didn't automatically change overnight. It still took me a good 6 or so years of going to therapy before I felt comfortable to start sharing it like I do now and to strangers like I am today. But at the same time, I think it's just about, having those open conversations, as we're going to share today, is a different way of looking at resilience. So I really appreciate listening to that kind of, compressed story of my dad. You see some photos of him here. You see a couple of photos of me as a massive chav. If you know what a chav was, that was definitely me in my late teens. But at the stage I am now, I'm a dad of 3 boys. I've got an incredible wife called Amy. I do work that is very meaningful and very purposeful, and I wake up every day, and some days are a struggle and some days aren't, but I still have my challenges. But at the same time, I'm hoping that by sharing my story here today and in the work that I do with Everymind, I can try and encourage more people to talk about it too. But this kind of takes us on nicely to resilience. And looking at this kind of definition of resilience, resilience does not mean the absence of stress, struggle, or hardship. It's defined as the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, and it can be learned. Now, when I look at that definition, the first part of that definition is one that I always struggled to relate to. Resilience does not mean the absence of stress, struggle, or hardship. Here's what I mean by that. I believe to be resilient meant pushing everything away. In other words, when I lost my dad to suicide, I went straight out with my friends on that weekend. I went straight back to work. When people ask me if I'm okay, I would say I'm fine. Because in my eyes, being resilient was being able to say to people, I'm fine, I'm good, and pushing that stress, struggle, or hardship away. But at the same time, I think about someone like my granddad, who I definitely would have said was resilient back in the day, who lost my dad, his only child, lost my nan, his wife of over 50 years, a month later, and never cried at any of those funerals. And his way of managing it was just push it away, push it away, push it away, suppress, suppress, suppress. So again, when you're looking at resilience, I think we have to have more of a conversation and discussion, and looking at some of Subira's work, I'm sure she might talk about this, is that it does not mean that I don't struggle. It does not mean that I don't experience stress. It does not mean that I don't experience hardship. But what it does mean is, do I have the tools to be able to kind of navigate through some of those challenges more effectively? Again, those tools were tools that I didn't have at that time when I struggled. So again, it's looking at ways in which we can educate and share this definition of resilience and try and change the way that we've approached it for such a long time as well. Now, when we're looking at it, there's many ways in which we might need to be resilient at work, to meet deadlines, to deal with difficult people, to manage change, to deal with rejection, to deal with criticism. And then at home, the parenting challenges that we might have, our relationships, financial concerns, arguments, life-changing experiences, and many more. And even on this slide, they're separated on purpose, because I'm sure you guys will remember this, leave your personal baggage at home, don't bring it to work with you. All of this advice that potentially we was, brought up with, and potentially we was told when we first entered into the workplace, is advice that's very difficult for us to do. I definitely know, specifically with this hybrid world that we're in now as well, if I've had an argument with my wife the night before, that massively impacts my work. If I've got stuff going on at work, that massively impacts me as a dad and as a husband and everything else. So again, when we're looking at this, it's overall, how do I take more of a holistic approach personally to develop more resilience? And again, as we're going to look at, what can we do in the workplace and what can we do to support more people to be more resilient as well? And there are so many sort of, benefits of a resilient workplace, as you can kind of see here. And I'd be happy, Jaya, to sort of send these slides out if anyone wants access to them as well. But you're looking at kind of development opportunities, they're more taken up because, again, we have more of a growth mindset when resilience is embedded into a culture of an organization. We're potentially challenged, we're looking at challenges and problems very differently. Communication, as I'm going to talk about in just a minute, is improved. Vulnerability, people show up as their whole selves at work as well. Expectations are clear. Self-care is seen as a priority. There is so many potential benefits of resilient workforce. The big question is how do we create that, right? So again, I'm going to sort of try and give you as many tips as I can in the next 10 minutes to try and help with that as well. And the question is, what can HR or what can people in your, situation, or those individuals that are champions or, trying to help other people in an organization do to support other people to be more resilient? And again, when we're looking at it, there's again so many different benefits around it, and resilience can triple when employers adopt a well-rounded program of well-being support. So again, what we mean by this is, I wish that I could show up today and say, hey, everyone, go and do this specific training on resilience for all of your employees, and they're going to be resilient, they'll never burn out, et cetera, et cetera. It isn't as simple as that. It isn't as straightforward as that. I think we've tried to find that one-size-fits-all approach for too long now. And I think, again, lots of us are realizing that this more well-rounded program of well-being support is the approach that we now need to take. But again, what do we mean by that? It's like, how do we take a well-rounded approach when it comes to developing resilience to try and avoid burnout? And again, feel free to use this, guys. We use a model called the 3 Ps with every single one of our partners. It's something that we speak about quite a lot. And it's just focusing more on a holistic approach to resilience, to well-being and mental health in general. And then what we can start to do is think about how we as individuals within a business are approaching each of these areas when it comes to resilience. Let me explain what they are typically. I always start with the bottom, protect. Protect is the part that I always identified very early on when I started sharing my story in organizations about 6 years ago. What protect is individuals that are potentially absent from work due to mental health, or potentially are employees within an organization that we know are dealing with mental ill health, right? Now, the problem with protect is if we just focus in on that area as a business, we're reactive. My dad's organization was reactive. He was an engineer. When he died from suicide, all of a sudden they were like doing as much as they possibly can to try and make changes for the future. But as a family, that's too late for us, right? So protect is very much until there's an issue that happens, we're not going to do anything about it. We'll react and we'll respond. Now, protect is a really important part of any organization strategy because we still need to have tools where people can go to if they are in that crisis situation. But above that, we have this element called provide. And provide is what are we doing in regards to education and providing employees within a business the tools and the resources that they need to be resilient, to again, hopefully put as many barriers in the way as possible to stop them from getting into that situation, right? And then promote on top is the one that a lot of us don't talk about. It's the hardest one for us to tackle, but promote is very much about culture, psychological safety, the root causes of burnout, which again, I'm sure Subira will go into and many more as well. So when we start to look at that from more of a holistic lens, we can then start to think about the initiatives that we're applying in each of those areas. Again, let's take protect. Employees potentially in crisis, those that are absent, what are we doing to help them? Then we look at provide. Education, support tools, self-reflection. This is really important. And again, when we're taking it from a resilience lens, what are we trying to do to help employees stay more resilient in that provide section? And then promote is our culture, it's our policies, it's our psychological safety, it's how our leaders are responding. It's the root causes of burnout and what can we do to try and address that as well. And when we start to take that holistic approach, we can then start to, allow people to feel more resilient and start to deliver and be more resilient in the workplace as well. This isn't just as simple as saying, hey, what we're going to do is we're going to develop some resilience training. We're going to deliver it to everyone. They're all going to be resilient. Burnout's not going to happen. It's not as simple as that. So think about that holistic approach. Then what we can start to do is we can start to dive a little bit deeper and we can start to think about how can we encourage employees to develop more resilience? Because again, I think as an organization, and we work with many, there's only so much that we can do. We have a duty of care and we have to do as much as we possibly can. But at the same time, individuals with that resilience, it's about them, doing as much as they can to stay resilient too. So again, what can we do as an organization to try and encourage that? Now I'm going to sort of share 4 areas, and these are going to be sort of 4 key takeaways that you can implement and again, can help you with resilience as well. But again, when we're looking at those pillars, promote is vulnerability. I'm going to talk about that. When we talk about resilience, we don't necessarily talk about vulnerability naturally, but I think vulnerability is a massive piece when it comes to resilience. It's encouraging employees to share, bringing light to the strength of being vulnerable at work. Again, I'll share an example of that personally in just a minute, but vulnerability is one thing that we can look at. Again, when we're looking at promoted psychological safety, taking a deeper look at your culture. Again, how do we create that psychological safety and allow people to be more resilient? And then when we're looking at provide, it's education. What are we doing to educate employees in the business, to help them self-reflect, to help them to understand, to develop that self-awareness where they can be more resilient, to have those tools. And then again, when we're looking at provide, it's that tailored approach. There's no one size fits all. So again, I'll give you something that we share in regards to how you can stay agile with your business. But just quickly going to go through these to get you thinking. Vulnerability, there's an incredible TED talk by an incredible lady called Brené Brown. She's a social researcher. She defines vulnerability as emotional exposure, risk, and uncertainty. Now, that definition in itself scares the life out of me. Like, I don't want my emotions exposed. I don't want risk. I don't want uncertainty, specifically when I'm surrounded by my colleagues, right? So again, when we're looking at that, that's what it is. But we've had this negative view of vulnerability that it's weakness. And it's definitely why I didn't talk about my story for such a long time as well. It's probably definitely why my dad didn't open up about the challenges that he was experiencing for such a long time as well. But what we tend to find is with vulnerability in the workplace, what it does is it creates confidence. Again, coming back to that resilience workforce, confidence to make mistakes, confidence to say that I'm struggling, confidence to potentially, share how I'm feeling. But at the same time, it creates authenticity from a leadership point of view, but also feeling more connected to our team. And again, creating connection is a big part of developing resilience. But then trust, psychological safety, opening up that trust. Again, I'm sure you guys know this in the line of work that you do, but Every time I share my story, guess what happens? Someone shares back. That vulnerability creates that safe space, that trust. And again, that's a big, big benefit of doing so as well. So again, what can we do to try and encourage that? Encouraging sharing, openly in one-on-ones with wider teams as well. Maybe, admitting that you don't always have the answer. That's a sign of vulnerability. Encouraging ideas from employees, creating that kind of open environment, admitting mistakes, asking for help when you need it, and sharing bits of your personal life and just encouraging it more as well. And in bold, you can see that. I think that's such a big part to highlight with vulnerability, to encourage people to share more. We're not asking you to share your deepest, darkest secrets. You don't have to talk about your dad taking his own life. Yeah, that's something I'm comfortable to share now, but I wasn't always comfortable to share it. For me, with my team, there's stuff that I don't want to share with them. But at the same time, I can still be vulnerable. I can still share openly in a way that I feel in control. It could be that I feel a little bit run down at the moment. It could be that this is a true story. It would have been my dad's 60th birthday today. Definitely has an impact on how I'm delivering, definitely has an impact on how I'm feeling. We're going out tonight to try and celebrate it. But of course, I'm picturing what would he look like when he was 60, all of this stuff going through my head. But I feel comfortable to share that with you guys, but there is so much more that I won't, right? So again, vulnerability, we're always in control of it. It's just leaning into that a little bit more. And again, encouraging leaders in your business. It's very difficult, but if a leader can sort of stand up and share something vulnerably, first and foremost, a leader is human, and only when we have the strength to show our vulnerability can we truly lead. I think, again, vulnerability, encouraging that is something for you to think about. Then that kind of falls in nicely to psychological safety, the impact of stigma. I still think we don't talk about stigma that much. Public stigma, self-stigma, very difficult for us to kind of address. Whenever we're looking at initiatives, engagement might be low. The first thing we need to think about is, let's tackle stigma first. Why is engagement low? Why aren't people coming to these webinars? Why aren't people opening up to mental health first aiders? Well, again, we have to look at public stigma, self-stigma, stigma within the organization as well. So again, what can you do to try and help with that? Stigma in itself makes people feel alone, feel isolated, feel judged, low self-esteem, lack hope, etc., etc. And again, we all play a personal role in this. After today's session, can we look at the language that we're using that can potentially add to the stigma? Can we educate ourselves more on mental illness to, again, try and help with that? And again, try and educate and encourage other people as well. Vulnerability is a big part of this, as we've already said, and having more conversations around this, around resilience at work, can definitely create that psychological safety as well. The other thing as well, guys, the third one is looking at education. This comes into the provide section. So this is where we're then looking at more of the initiatives that we're focused on. If we start to tackle that promote section, and then we start to look at provide, the engagement of provide is going to be greater. When you start to deliver resilience training with vulnerability, wellbeing check-ins, coaching, mindfulness training, self-awareness, all of these stuff that you can see here on the screen, you're now providing those initiatives, that education, that support, those resources. But because we've tackled psychological safety, stigma, encourage vulnerability, the engagement and the receptiveness of these will be greater. So again, there's so many different initiatives that you can do, but again, it's implementing them in the correct way that's going to guarantee that engagement too. What I'll do, guys, once I've finished is I'll share a little link to this, these resources that we have. So once I've finished, I'll pop it in the chat box. This is a completely free resource that we have, and I'll share with you. It's just something that you can grab, you can share out with your colleagues if you want to. And again, this is just something that you can do to educate, but also get them thinking about what they can do to recharge, to get that rest, which is, again, a big part of resilience as well. So guys, I'll pop that in the link. Pop that in the chat box once I've finished presenting as well. And then finally, this should be number 4, not number 3, is education. Again, looking at wellbeing champions, looking at people to kind of spread that message about the importance of resilience, to create that vulnerability, to foster that culture as well. Again, when we're looking at it, building out the right employee initiatives, again, that fit in with your structure, your strategy as well. This is all something that I want you to be thinking about as well. And then bringing it all together, not having that kind of one-size-fits-all approach, looking at the tailored approach of resilience. What we mean by this is we use these 5 different pillars with a lot of our clients as the journey to go through from reactive to proactive. Thinking about this, what are you doing as a business when it comes to commit? Have you got commitment from senior leadership? What are you doing in regards to engage? Have you got the engagement when it comes to resilience? Equipping your employees with the right tools, empowering them, transforming them, again, looking at psychological safety as well. So again, thinking about some of these questions here, guys, as we come to a sort of close. In particular, has the company made a strategic commitment to well-being? It's very difficult to tackle burnout and resilience if you haven't done that. Is this embedded into the culture? Are we implementing tools to mask real issues? Again, Subira might talk about that a little bit more, but again, it's looking at the root causes of burnout and the root causes of potentially people struggling. How can you tailor your comms to engage more employees with initiatives that you provide? Again, we work with financial companies, construction companies, retail companies, and multiple more. We have to tailor our approach because everyone is different. Everyone's on a different journey. And then again, what training and style provider works best for your organization? Is it someone who's personal? Is it someone who's practical? Is it a combination of both? Looking at what training and style of provider works best when you start to implement these changes is also something to think about as well. So guys, that's me. And just one thing that I always do is with so much information thrown at you in the space of 20 minutes, here's my story, here's some stuff. I want to just sort of say, what's one thing that you can take away from today's session? So just sometimes think about that. What's one thing that you might have heard, even if it's, conversations that we might have later? What's one thing that you've heard that you can implement? I think it's really important that you always start small as well. And guys, if you want to find out a little bit more kind of about us and who we've helped, happy to kind of start a conversation after today's session as well. But that's enough from me. I'll stop talking now. Appreciate your time.
Paul, that was amazing. And I just want to highlight to everybody, these are real whistle-stop tours of the work that Paul and Subira can do for you and your organizations. And we will share all of their details. We will share these slides so you know directly how to get in touch with them if you want to use them going forward. But that was absolutely fantastic. I'm not going to take up much more time here. I'm just going to open up the floor. Does anyone have any questions for Paul? This is a really good time to ask him directly. Please go ahead. I don't know if someone did come off mute then or not, but any questions at all? If you don't, that's also okay. You can think about it. You can ask him directly later when we share the contact details. But I'll just give everyone sort of 30 seconds to have a think if they have any questions for Paul.
If I may.
Hey,
as you might know, we're putting together a guide on best practices and trying to gather that from your experience working with companies. What have you seen that are kind of the best practices out there? And what are some of the things that you would say, oh, maybe those types of things don't work, that you've seen in organizations outside of our industry? Because our guide is focused on our industry, but sometimes we can learn from other sectors that might be more advanced than ours.
Yeah, good question. I think, again, it's very individual, but there's one thing that we focus on a lot with every business that we work with is it's a concept that we call start with the why and not the what. So basically, when you're typically looking at well-being and strategy, everything else, one of the biggest mistakes that I've seen companies make for such a long time is when you say, what do you do for your employees' mental health? We do, free fruit, we do this, we do that, we've got this benefit, we've got that benefit, we've got mental health first aiders, we've got this. And then when you say, why do you do it? That's when they struggle. So what we try to do with any organization, no matter the industry, is start with the why, because then everyone's why is going to be very different. Take Wagamama as an example, like with their wellbeing partner. So we're looking at kind of holistically what we're going to be doing for them. Their why is very much about like, how do we get the engagement into the restaurants? How do we get, people in the restaurants, the chefs, everything else, getting the support that's available? Because it's a lot easier for us to just reach head office as an example. So that's their why. And then once we figure that out and what they want to do, we can then start to layer the initiatives on top that are going to have the greatest impact. So, it's very much, in my opinion, start with that why. Once you define that, then the initiatives and the how become a lot easier. So that's the piece of advice that I would give to that question.
Thank you.
Hi, Paul Manish here. Hi. Question about executive leadership. And what you see, what in your experience has been the outcome of the executives in an organization actually promoting some of the stuff that you're talking about. I know you didn't mention that, and it's a lot of peer-to-peer discussions that you're promoting, but I'm just wondering, have you noticed any differences there?
Yeah, game changer. It's a massive game changer. I think, Manish, Guy Carpenter is one of our partners, and we did a launch event in person a few weeks ago, and one of the CEOs was talking about non-negotiables. What do you do for your mental health? And even then, a lot of leaders will be fearful of standing up in front of people and saying, for my mental health, I do X, Y, and Z. And what happened is I shared my story, you know, sort of talked a little bit about kind of what we do. And then the CEO sort of stood up and spoke about, here's what they do for their mental health. And they referenced a personal story of sadly losing their mother-in-law, of, you know, needing that little bit of time to recharge, to reset. And I'm there thinking, oh, you've completely outdone me here. I'm super excited for that, because this is the leader. This is someone who everyone works with and almost in a way is looking up to in a way. So again, it's very easy for someone external to come in and share their story. It starts those conversations, but in that sense, just that having that leader share, even if it's like, here's what I do for my mental health, or here's why mental health is important, that creates this huge different dynamic. So I think great question. If you can get that exec buy-in, and sometimes it's just one, sometimes you need to share stories and encourage them and get them to see it in a different way, educate them in different ways. But if you can just get that one exec sponsor or exec, you know, leader to kind of share, it definitely has a knock-on effect for everyone. So yeah, really, really good question, and something for people to think about. Cool.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Without further ado, I'm going to just very quickly move on to Subira. As I said earlier, she sort of launched Empowered Consulting, which is all about corporate burnout prevention. I won't take up too much time introducing her. I know she's got it as part of her slides as well, but I will pass on the stage, and as I said, I'll be sharing Paul's details at the end, Subira's details at the end, all out in an email. But I just want to say a really, really massive thank you to Paul. It's always a pleasure hearing from you.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. And thank you, Paul. Unfortunately, a lot of what you said resonates with me, and I think that tends to happen in the space that we work in. But if you bear with me, allow me to share my screen. Let's see. Is that working for everyone? Okay, perfect. So today's talk is out of the frying pan into the fire, a bit of an homage to Lord of the Rings. Actually, it was The Hobbit. It was a chapter in The Hobbit, because unfortunately, we may be in a position where we're exiting a pandemic into an epidemic of burnt out professionals. So quickly today, in the time that I have, I'd like to introduce myself, introduce why this topic is just so incredibly important, share a bit of my story as well to help you understand the context as to why I do the work I do in the way I do it, highlight the problem and give you an answer, pretty much. I like to keep things very simple. So over the last few years, I have been on a mission to prevent an epidemic of burnout professionals. I am affectionately known as the corporate hippie. Corporate most definitely the operative word, but I'm very much hippie in my approach in terms of being people-centric and heart-centered in my approach. And I've had the opportunity to work with different world and global brands across different industries, because burnout genuinely does not discriminate. No matter what organization I've gone into, the conversations that we end up having in workshops, after the keynotes, through coaching, all tend to have the same outcomes, common denominator. So as I said, corporate is operative. I'm a huge believer that an organization is only as successful as the talent it retains, not the talent it hires. And that organizations have to invest in their people because they are the true talent. And at the moment, burnout is costing a huge financial loss to a lot of organizations. So the loss of working days due to stress and depression and anxiety, 26 billion a year. 68 billion for poor mental health and lifestyle choices, and 40 billion pounds are being lost through absenteeism, people coming to work and either not working or just not showing up to work at all due to their health. Now, the thing is, effective wellbeing programs have an incredible rate of return, right? Over 800% is the return of investment if you can effectively install a wellbeing program. The issue is, but wellness doesn't prevent burnout. So just to illustrate this a bit more, let me share my story with you. I had the perfect work-life balance. I went to the gym 6 times a week, sometimes twice a day, predominantly plant-based. It was 2017, which meant meditation and yoga had really hit the scene, and I was doing that religiously. And I was also an investment analyst. So when the reporting season was over, I was on an all-inclusive resort with the girls, 5-star, at least 3 times a year. And I had this perfect work-life balance for about 9 months. And then I went to bed with the flu, and the next morning I woke up and I couldn't feel anything below my hips. But I thought, yeah, it's all right. I'll continue going to work. I worked for an investment consultancy who were ahead of the game when it came to flexible working. So I had my laptop at home. So driving into the office wasn't such a big deal. However, in a few weeks, I then started getting migraines for the first time. And I never even got headaches, but now I was getting migraines. And so I was forced to take some time off work. I took about a week and a bit off, but the day I was due to go back to work, I had closed my left eye to do my makeup, put my eyeliner on, and realized I couldn't see anything out of my right eye. But because I'd been off work, I don't know how long I've been blind for, because the body's incredible at compensating. However, I also had a holiday due the next week. So I knew that if I was blind due to pressure, I wouldn't be safe to fly. So I went into the hospital. The consultant done investigations for the entire day and then said to me that they wanted to write a letter to an insurance company to postpone my holiday. I said, no, it's okay. Like, if it's not due to pressure, we can deal with this when I get back, doc. It's fine. I'm going on holiday. So next day, I was off in Gatwick Airport in a wheelchair because I was desperate for this holiday. It'd been a very long Q1. However, when I got back, the investigations continued, the sporadic immobility, the sporadic blindness continued, and I decided that actually, maybe it was time I switched jobs. Maybe if I left the consultancy when I went to asset management, I can get a beautiful pay bump for doing work that wasn't so manual. And so I did that. Despite the disabilities I was having, I decided that if my life was falling apart, I was going to control what I could, which was work. So I threw myself into this new job. However, during my probation period in the asset management world, the consultant looked at me, my neurologist looked at me and said, Subira, you have multiple sclerosis. And I looked at him and said, well, how's that possible? How have I got multiple sclerosis? I had the perfect work-life balance. And he said, yeah, but these things just happen to people. I'm an analyst. These things don't just happen. I need to understand what the connection was. And then I remember the conversation I had in my final year of economics. In my final year of economics, my mum had a heart attack and was put into a medically induced coma. And I completed my degree with my mum in a coma. And I had walked into one of my lab sessions and the lecturer said to me, Subira, how are you managing? And I said, I'm not, but I'm coping. And I was trying to keep things tongue in cheek, but actually remembering that conversation at the point of diagnosis was a game changer for me, because many of us are incredible at coping with stress. We don't actually know what it means to manage stress. And so realizing this, I decided I needed to take early medical retirement from the investment industry so that I can regain my health. And I did so I took a 5-month career break, researched and studied and became obsessed with burnout, because what I'd realized is up until that point, I had lived in a burnout cycle. So it has started with completing my economics degree with my mum in a coma, to the following year, being admitted into hospital, fighting for my life for a week, fighting sepsis, because I had worked myself into the ground. So the following year, my mum suddenly passing the day after my birthday and started my first investment job 4 days after her funeral, which I would not recommend to anyone. Hadn't been so resilient, hadn't been able to achieve great things through trauma, had actually led me to a point where resilience was killing me, and that's how I was diagnosed with MS. Now, there is the upside of my story, which meant I went from Universal Credit to become a Young Business Person of the Year. But if you want to know more about that part of the story, then feel free to pick up your book, The Diversity Project. It's just a little shameless plug for Stephen Butler there. But what I will say is my story is not unique. So before the pandemic in 2019, over 54% of working days were lost due to stress-related ill health. So stress is not a new phenomenon. And despite the fact that we've seen the way of the world change in terms of how we work, being able to work flexibly, not having to go into the office every day, taking back some of that commuting time and, having the resources and the time to do more well-being practices, the percentage of working days being lost due to stress-related ill health has increased to 84%. So what is the problem that we're facing here? And in all the work that I've done with all the different companies across different industries, I've realized there's a huge misconception, and it's this. The first one being rundown versus burnout. They are not the same thing, but they often are conflated as being the same thing. And this is why there's a huge issue at the moment, because although we're trying to address the issue, we're dealing with the wrong problem. So bear with me. Imagine you had a phone and you're using it all day. Eventually that battery is going to die, right? You've been using your phone. Naturally, the phone needs to be charged. So you put the phone on charger, and after a while, you can turn it back on and continue using it. That's fine. That's the same as being run down. However, when it comes to burnout, it's like the same phone. it's turned off, it's died, you've put it on charge, but no matter how long you've charged it for, it won't turn back on. And if it does turn back on, it can no longer function at its optimum. That's the difference between being burnt out. So when it comes to being run down, which is a natural process, if you've been working hard, working intensely, particularly during a reporting period or a certain project, or you've got, you know, parental responsibilities or care responsibilities at home, naturally you're going to feel run down. And the solution to that is to just rest, recover, recharge, and get back to it. However, burnout is the result of being chronically exposed to stress. And therefore, it's not about resting. We need to actually look at stress. Now, the thing about stress is it's just like fire. It can be productive, it can be constructive when it's well managed and when it's well utilized. However, stress, just like fire, if it's mismanaged, if it's misutilized, has the potential to be catastrophic and disastrous. So the more stress you have in your life, the more you're exposed to it, the more likely you are to burn out. And being burnt out is like your house being on fire. That's the equivalent. And so imagine if there was a house fire and you called the fire brigade and they said to you, hi, we can't make it right now, but could you just please breathe in and breathe out and just stay by the fire? How would you feel? Pretty much hopeless still, right? So this is one of the first issues when it comes to preventing burnout within organizations. We're dealing with the wrong issue. Asking people to just take more rest, more time off work, take their annual leave, doesn't do them any good because they may not be run down, they actually burn out. And just a quick side note, in order to understand whether you're run down or burnt out, there are two questions you can ask yourself. The first one being, do I feel like I'm in control of my life? Am I living life or am I simply existing? Is life happening to me? If you can answer yes to the fact that you're in control of your life, the likelihood is you're run down, not burnt out. The second question being, do I know what purpose and direction my life is going in? Do I understand the reason why I'm doing the things I'm doing in the bigger picture, the bigger context? If you can answer yes to that, again, you're most likely run down and not burnt out, because when you're burnt out, the world around you is bleak and you lose your sense of direction, focus, and purpose. And it's the burnout part that is associated with mental health because it comes with depression and anxiety as a result. The second issue is that we often ask people to create work-life balance. And hopefully technology does not fail me because I love this little clip. Let me know if you can hear it.
For you. What am I going on to punch? And I'll punch. Learn how to go. You always to be behind
I like a bit of Karate Kid me, the original, of course. But the thing when it comes to work-life balance, we keep asking people to create it, but it's the most ridiculous ask to make because creating work-life balance is like trying to live life on a tightrope. You're trying to keep everything up in the air while juggling all your balls. And work-life balance or balance in general is something that's really hard to maintain. And the moment something happens, i.e. a life event, which acts like a gust of wind, you're thrown off balance, everything drops and you have to try and start again. A better solution is to ask people to create work-life harmony, being able to create peace in both your personal life and your professional life so that they can work in tandem, as opposed to having to exert a lot of energy to show up in both places with perfection. It just doesn't work. And then lastly, resilience. When it comes to preventing burnout, resilience is counterproductive because resilience is like the story of the frog in tepid water. Resilient people are really good at adjusting and acclimatizing to the harmful situations that they're in. They fail to have a natural barometer to know when those situations have become fatal. And in my case, resilience was killing me. Being so resilient, being able to adjust, be able to acclimatize to the situations around me, in which I did because I completed my degree with my mum in a coma, including the first-class socioeconomic dissertation that I completed in 48 hours, handed in 1 minute before the deadline. That level of resilience of being able to take on harmful situations and just keep going and achieving great things is actually killing me. And I got diagnosed with multiple sclerosis as a result. When it comes to resilience, it's a short-term strategy, not a long-term solution. Furthermore, it's also not an inclusive approach to take, which is really important when we're talking about a diversity project, because we know we have to look at things with an intersectional lens. Resilience is a natural antidote to resistance. So the more protected characteristics you have, the more resistance you tend to meet in comparison to your counterparts. Therefore, you naturally are more resilient. Problem with that is with the resilience, you're able to tolerate high levels of stress. So if you can tolerate high levels of stress, you're exposed to stress for a longer period of time, and that chronic exposure to stress inevitably ends to burnout. So things like mindfulness, resilience, lunchtime yoga, self-directed learning for well-being, or even implementing 4-day working weeks, they are great if the person you're implementing them with is run down, i.e. they need a moment to just rest and recharge. But for someone who's burnt out, what they need is a longer-term solution. So remember I said stress was like fire. Wellness programs, they provide stress relief, but what they don't do is put out the fire. Stress relief focuses on the symptoms of burnout, so maybe their inability to have energy and vitality or show up at work and perform in the way they used to, but it does nothing to deal with the root cause of burnout, which is stress. And that stress can show up either in your personal or your professional life. So what is the answer? So resilience, as I said, is a great short-term strategy, but for a long-term approach, you need something else. So how many of us are familiar with the saying, when life gives you lemons, make, anyone else want to say it?
Lemonade.
Lemonade.
There we go. But no, resilient people are really good at making lemonade. They can make enough lemonade to fill a swimming pool and then keep swimming until they find themselves in troubled waters. But instead, if we become tenacious, the result of that is then we can become agile and solution focused in our approach, i.e. when life does hand us a lemon, because that is guaranteed, instead of automatically making lemonade, tenacious people instead say, okay, right, do I have enough lemonade? What else can I make with these lemons? But more importantly, is the lemon worth the squeeze? Far too many of us, because we are so resilient, we are so good at thriving under pressure, myself included, i.e. dissertation in 48 hours, first class, we are really good at just getting on with it and utilizing that fire as fuel, but not realizing which fires actually potentially can burn us. Because as I said, stress can be productive and constructive, or it can be catastrophic and disastrous. And if we don't have a natural barometer, if we don't have a natural way to filter out which stress are necessary, which ones are unnecessary, the result is going to be burnout, because our capacity to manage stress is finite as is. So the work that I do with my people, with my clients, with my organizations, is I help them fireproof the careers of their people. If stress is like fire, then you need to fireproof your individuals in your organization so that you can effectively utilize the stress to excel, but effectively manage the stress to not end up in a burnout cycle. So the Fireproof Career is an ultimate 5-step program, and it helps you to retain talent by preventing burnout. Now, at Empowered Consulting, we believe in a top-down approach, and I'll go to that in a minute. But let's just quickly take a moment as to why fireproofing a career is so important. So number one, we have to educate around burnout. As I said, being run down and being burnt out are not the same thing, but they often get conflated, which means we're prescribing the wrong pill for the wrong issue. I.e. the resting and recharging is great for someone who's run down in the short term, in the interim, but for someone who's burnt out, who's experiencing chronic stress, helplessness, lack of self-agency, depression, anxiety, you can't rest when you're stressed. It's like being locked in a room full of wasps, where each of those wasps represents the stress in your life. I've lived that. I had a wasp nest in my ceiling, and I'd have to wake up 4 o'clock every morning to let the wasp out before I could go back to bed. So first of all, we have to educate on what burnout is, how it affects people, how they can see it within themselves and others, and also make sure that they're taking the right approach in terms of recovery. Secondly, we have to help people learn how to effectively manage stress. As I said before, stress is like fire. So we need to help people utilize stress to either thrive under pressure, to exceed and excel in their relative area of expertise, or help them identify what are the unnecessary stress in their life that is taking up their capacity, taking up that cognitive capacity in order to show up for themselves and then show up at work. Thirdly, we have to then look at the financial situations of individuals. For example, myself, before I got diagnosed with MS, I was in £8,500 worth of consumer debt because I thought retail therapy was easier than actual therapy. And it was just a lot more expensive. But if it wasn't for the fact that I made an effort to become debt-free, then I would have had the ability to take control of my life and my health and regain my health. And so with the one-to-one coaching I do, with the workshops I do with people, they don't realize actually how much their financial well-being ties in with their mental well-being. Because actually, if you can control your finances, it gives you greater control over your life, because you're increasing your disposable income without having to wait on an external factor like a new job or a pay rise. And according to PwC, people who are experiencing financial difficulties and well-being are 6 times more likely to look for another job, which costs organizations a lot of money. So that costs organizations about £30,500 per employee who's at a 25k salary, and that increases the higher the salary goes. So it's really important actually that we help people take control over the money that they have today, as opposed to educating them on investments and pensions when they don't have this disposable income to even start that journey. Next, we have to help people create a burnout-free lifestyle. A lifestyle is preventative of burnout, so they don't end up in a burnout cycle to begin with. Now, a burnout-free lifestyle contains 3 different categories or factors, should I say. The first one, stress mitigation, i.e. eliminating the unnecessary stress, so they have the capacity to not be in survival mode, but actually be solution-focused and innovative and tenacious, as opposed to resilient in their situation. We then have to make sure that their life is fulfilling. They understand their core values and their purpose as to why they're doing things, so that it can actually show up for themselves, show up for the people around them instead of existing. And lastly, their life has to be fun. So when they're not working, when they have got that annual leave or the 4-day working week, or just their weekends in general, they can really make the most of it and allow themselves to rest, recharge, and recover, so they're not constantly run down. But if you notice, the first 3 steps is what actually prevents the burnout in itself. It eliminates the exposure to the stress in order for them to not have a burnout lifestyle in the first place. But lastly is about the career creation. So with that, we have to help people take control of their careers and be entrepreneurial in their approach. A lot of the times, particularly in the diversity and inclusion space, we talk about amplifying voices and giving people the opportunity to speak. However, you can give someone a mic, but if they don't have an empowered voice behind that mic, you're never going to actually hear their perspective, their point of views to contribute to the wider organization and actually have the benefits of an inclusive and diverse culture. Which leads me quite nicely into this next part. When it comes to preventing corporate burnout, it is a 2-pronged approach. So far, we've looked at empowering the individuals to take ownership of their own well-being and their career and preventing burnout in a pragmatic and long-term way. But next, we also have to look at how we can make the culture inclusive, because if you don't have an inclusive culture, by default, you have a hostile environment, and no one thrives in hostility. So this is why we take a top-down approach at Empower Consulting. We specifically work with line managers and future leaders, because whilst they often get a bad rep of being the frozen middle within an organization, actually they have the potential to be the gateway to changing the culture of the entire organization. And over the last few years, line managers have become pseudo mental health first aiders, whether they're qualified or not, because they've had the added responsibility of not just managing up and managing down, but now managing the well-being of their teams. And over 76% of line managers personally internalize the failures of their team when individuals report that they're experiencing burnout. And the thing is, when you invest in your line managers, it opens up the entire organization, because it's easier to put out a fire in someone else's house when your own house is on fire. So investing in your line managers and helping them take control of their own mental health in terms of preventing burnout, getting out of that survival mode and being able to see their North Star again in the bleak world actually enables you to transform the entire organization. So it is time for Q&A. I'm happy to answer any questions you have, but if you're curious to know more about the Fireproof Career, then please feel free to scan this QR code, which will take you directly to the website, and you can find out more about the different pillars, the different benefits of the pillars, as well as book an inquiry call so we can just discuss it further and see how we can work together going forward. But the floor is yours.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Subira. Another fantastic speaker. So it's such a pleasure to have you. I will open up the floor, guys. Any questions, please do ask Subira.
I'd love to ask a question, please. Subira, thinking about your own experiences early in life, if you had the transformation ability to advise yourself and take advice yourself and kind of speak to your younger self when you were at university, what might you have done differently then to try and prevent that burnout that you experienced?
In all honesty, it was fear. So it's about how do you manage fear. So when you feel like your world is falling apart, it's not a case that you have to throw yourself into work, but it's also a case of looking at what else have you got around you, what resources. So part of creating a burnout-free lifestyle, part of it's called empowered connections. Like, who is it you have around you in your circle that you can reach out to and ask for help and support? But also it's a case of, as I said, I thought retail therapy was easier. If I had an understanding of how important financial well-being was in connection to my mental well-being, and understanding that power play there, because it then had an effect. Thankfully, I was able to pay off all my student overdrafts and stuff within the first few months of leaving uni, just by being switched on about that. But I think for me, it's been a case of understanding what burnout is, which is not the same as being run down. I thought I was just constantly run down. So when I would get sick, when I would not have any energy, I thought, okay, more sleep would help. But actually, I was an insomniac for over 10 years. So more sleep wasn't actually giving me more rest. I thought that working out would help. So I was in the gym 6 times a week, sometimes twice a day, and uni definitely twice a day, because I couldn't sleep and I was scared to just be still. So understanding the difference between run down and burnout, and knowing that all the things I was doing was actually just adding fuel to the fire. It wasn't actually doing anything to help me protect myself, would have been really important. That is, so for me, I think it's the educational piece around how everything interplays with each other and how it can have an effect on my body. Because although I was doing well in the academic and professional sense, there's a book called The Body Keeps the Score. Regardless of how well you have managed stress, or you believe you manage stress, i.e. coping with it, your body will hold on to that effect.
I think that's fascinating. Thank you. And it sounds like, I think you also need to be going into universities, because it probably starts a lot earlier than when we get to the workplace, right?
So my burnout absolutely started long before I joined the investment industry. Like, when I called them and I asked them to, I called my first job to let them know that I'd like to defer. Actually, I didn't want to defer it. I wanted to take off a specific date in July. And they said, sure, is everything okay? I said, yeah, I just want to go to my mum's funeral. And they said, Subira, don't be silly, take compassionate leave. My response to them was, don't be silly. I can't take compassionate leave. I haven't earned it yet. So even though they had an incredible approach to mental health and well-being, and they really do, because I was disempowered in my own life, because I didn't understand rundown and burnout, because I didn't understand that actually throwing myself into work full pelt was not a solution, it didn't matter how amazing they were. I was disempowered in my own life. But no, absolutely, I do love working with university students, particularly around their stress and financial well-being, to put them in good stead before they go into the working world. So yeah, thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'm just conscious of time, guys. I think the main thing to reiterate is a huge thank you to Paul and Subira for such amazing short taster sessions. For everybody that we've got here, there is absolutely the opportunity to reach out to them directly and work with them directly, and we will share these slides, their details, how to get in touch with them. And we hope to work with both of them again in the future as well, within this work stream and this group. Absolutely loved having you guys, and just a huge thank you from everyone once again. To the neurodiversity workstream, thank you so much for joining us this time. It's been really, really lovely having you, and I plan to hopefully have you guys more involved in the future as well. We want to do so much more together. So thank you so much all, and I will let you carry on with the day, and we'll speak soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. That was fantastic. Thank you.